Well, we are very, very happy here in the corner booth to have Kalynn Applewhite join us for an author interview. Kalynn, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I just want to share with all of our listeners what Kalynn is all about. I can't wait to get into the nitty gritty of how you do your work and where people can get it. Kalynn's a writer at heart with a lifetime love of fantasy. She's a work-at-home mom and lead creator for Applewhite Games. Through her books, she pursues her passion for exploring feminist themes through fiction. Kalynn loves playing games, taking hikes, and eating super dark chocolate. She lives in Ohio with her husband and menagerie of children, cats, chickens, and houseplants. Kalynn, I wanted to ask you about your journey as an author, and you have really gone with a self-publishing direction rather than a traditional kind of publishing, submitting manuscripts to publishers. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what factors tipped the scales for you in making that decision to go self-publish versus the traditional route?
Well, I always, when I started considering taking my writing into like a career, I always assumed that I would query and kind of chase an actual publishing deal. Honestly, at that point, when I was young and much stupider, I thought that self-publishing was like, well, that's just giving up. I failed and here I am now, selling it on the corner for a nickel. That's not at all true. As I said, I was very stupid. So for me, self-publishing is honestly a great place to start. I make my own schedule. I don't have to worry about approval from my publishers. I don't have to worry if my sequel is going to get approved. I approved it. Done. I have a lot of creative freedom to do as I will. Again, setting my own schedule is huge because I have 2 kids and I am a stay-at-home mom. So yeah, I think those were the major factors in the decision. As I've kind of grown over the last year since I published my debut novel, I've learned more about publishing through, contacts that I've made, and has really cemented my decision that in the future I may pursue a publishing deal for another one of my works, but I only think I would accept a deal from one of the major publishing houses. I think that I would prefer to continue on the indie route if it came between that and using a smaller publishing house.
That's really great. I feel like it's funny, Kalynn, because I like to say that a lot myself. When I was younger and dumber and thinking different things and didn't have as much experience I still don't have a lot of experience, but I feel like the stigma for self-publishing is just kind of like, it just feels like it's so much freer to make those choices for yourself. That's really, it's a very confident step. That's great.
Yes. I think that self-publishing is very much what you make it. If you just cast your book out into the void and hope that people stumble upon it, no one's going to read it. You're going to get a couple family members and maybe one bystander. But if you put in the work and you treat it like a job, then sky's the limit.
Yeah, you, as far as I can tell, and Kalynn, this is the first time that we've met, but I follow you on social media and I kind of keep track of your progress, and you are a grinder. You are working all the time. And one of the things that you do really well is really keep your readers engaged with what you're doing now, what's coming next, without it being too much. I've always been impressed that you're sort of teasing things that are to come or just kind of keep it in touch. Is that something you do deliberately in order to stay engaged with your audience? Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I use Buffer to schedule out my social media posts so that way I don't have to worry about it in the day-to-day when I'd rather be writing anyway. But I do very intentionally try to keep people up to date with events, which I try and space out throughout the year, so I don't get overwhelmed, and so I have plenty to talk about throughout the year. I think it is important to, keep your audience, up to date with what's going on. Social media has been, a struggle for me and something I've only really had to get heavily into since I released my debut novel last year. For me, promotion is what takes you out of being a writer and puts you into being an author. It's that extra layer of consideration and work that is the defining difference between those two roles. I've also experienced that, I look at a lot of other accounts for inspiration, and the more of a following you have, the bigger you are, like Stephen King, Sarah J. Maas, the less you have to post, and so I honestly aspire to the day where I don't have to be on social media.
How do you feel about the balance? Like, how much of your social media posting is the audience that you're trying to reach? Have you found a happy balance between this is the information that I want to have and this is what I find the audience who I have now, what they want? Is that a constant work there, or have you got a pretty good balance?
I think that with any platform, what your audience wants is going to be very different. And so I've dipped my toes in many different platforms and found the ones that work for me. And I engage with those platforms in different ways. Like I post many reels to Instagram that I wouldn't post to my Facebook audience. I put a lot of memes on Facebook that I wouldn't, put on my Instagram. So I think it's just kind of feeling out the culture of your followers and the platform itself, wherever you are.
It does sound like an awful lot of work, which I'm not opposed to, but gosh. So like, do you come to this, and we're really talking about your social media, promotional work at this point. Did you have a background in that coming into this, or is it something that you learned as a necessity to promote your art?
Absolute necessity. I've said many times that if I was just, Joe on the street, I would have a personal Instagram that was set to private, and that would be it. I look forward to the day where my social media doesn't have to be such a grind. I have found a lot of ways to make things easier, such as using Buffer. I usually pick a weekend day where I set up my whole post for the week and maybe some ahead of time if I know enough. So that way I really don't have to worry about it in the day to day. It's been a struggle, like finding the balances on different platforms and what platforms work for me. And where I've gotten to, the two things that have made it a lot easier for me, because it has been a struggle, is if you're not vibing with the platform, just stop. Like I tried really hard on TikTok. I don't like making videos of myself talking. I absolutely hate it. It's incredibly stressful for me. And so I don't engage on TikTok very often. Whereas, editing a nice picture for Instagram and sharing it also on Facebook comes very naturally to me, and it's much easier. And so I play to my own strengths. I've also gotten into, I used to have I'm going to post X number of times a week, which could be very grueling. I have now come into the mindset of, I'm going to post something when I can think of something to say. And that's been freeing.
Yeah, it's very like, I love TikTok. I've learned so much how to be a better cook from TikTok. Yeah, but as a writer, I'm sort of like, what am I supposed to do on TikTok to promote myself on TikTok? Because I'm writing. Yeah, I love what you just said about you have to know each individual culture for each social media platform and approach them in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've found that the secret on TikTok is showing your face just a ton, which isn't a realm of comfort for me. So, I mean, I'll use CapCut every now and then, make a meme to promote my books, and it usually does okay, but it's definitely, it was an experiment for me, and now I'm using it as the inspiration strikes.
Yeah. What really got me interested in your book was the cover art that you shared online, and the blurb is fantastic. So I was wondering if I could read that so that folks could sort of discover that if they haven't heard of your book, Awakening Anne. Is that all right?
Oh, please do.
Yeah. So here's the jacket blurb for Awakening Anne by Kalynn Applewhite. At first glance, Margaret Ward appears like any other heiress living a charmed life on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Behind the door of her peculiar parlor, Maggie delves into the secrets of the unknown, exploring her talents as a spiritualist medium. When she holds a seance for a grieving widower, she discovers the dark mystery behind his wife's death. The farther she goes to discover the truth, the more she uncovers about the nature of the world beyond life itself, and the more dangerous her pursuit becomes. The story is the first installment in a journey of rebellion, self-discovery, and staying true to one's passions. Maggie is a spirited and independent woman, alongside a cast of colorful characters, including her fastidious older brother, a mysterious widower, her bold best friend with a passion for women's suffrage, and an eager academic who has dedicated his life to the study of the paranormal. Yeah, it's a great blurb. I love it.
Ta-da!
It's cool. It really draws you in. Like clearly, this book is set at the turn of the century. You know, the early 1900s. Correct?
Yes, in that Edwardian period, right before the 1920s.
Yeah, it's a beautiful time to be. What drew you to this time period?
I think really what was going on in the world at that time. I got to play with women's suffrage, which I think is horribly underrepresented in fiction. World War I is in the backdrop, which comes into play stronger throughout the series. And it's basically the latest I could possibly set the book to make spiritualism still relevant in the time period.
Last season, we had talked about blurbs as far as, really enticing readers to get into your work. How did you come about that? Was this something that you did with yourself, or did you have somebody help you, when reading it and kind of went back to it, or did it just kind of spring forth?
I made this myself, and it was a while ago, so I'm trying to remember. I do remember giving it quite a bit of thought and reworking it and rewording it until it said, just the trying to boil down the entire novel into its essence without giving away the whole plot is a difficult thing to do and an art form. But I think I managed it pretty well.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
No, I agree. We actually talked about, not the science of it, but we tried to say how long should it be and what does it need to do. And we came up with, about 150 words. And I just took a quick look. Thank you, word count. And it's 154 words. So spot on. Well done. Yeah, I really like how every word there is no wasted word in there. And it really is trying to tease what's possible in the narrative, because that blurb really needs to get people to go, ooh, I want to read that. And that's it. That's all it does. It's not giving character and story. It's just like, don't you want to open this? And I think it accomplishes that. Good work.
I think that you're playing with, there needs to be mystery. There needs to be the desire to read the book, because if the whole plot is spoiled, why would I pick it up? But there also needs to be enough detail to be intriguing. If it's all mystery, then they don't really have a toehold to get excited about.
Yeah, that's really well said.
Right.
And that's where all the rework comes from. I'm sure that wasn't your first, second, third, fifth, 10th pass that we just read. And it really does show. Like it shows that you went in like a sculptor and ding, 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 really kind of honed that language to be what you wanted it to be. And that is what we should all be doing, folks, out in the world.
If I was building a model for people to go through, and I think that I used this in what you just read, is introduce the character and introduce your plot hook, and then leave them with a chill. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
You're good.
And was this something that you wrote early in the process and or was it something that you kind of did after you were finished with the novel? Because we were sort of thinking about like using a sort of early stage of a blurb as a kind of like almost like a treatment for how you would go forth and write like a longer piece. How did the evolution of this happen?
So I definitely think that this, I'm guessing, but I think I'm right, came across when I was actually making the Kickstarter page to promote the book. It was I need a blurb now. Insert blurb. I definitely did not come up with this before I wrote the book. However, when I am outlining, I use a process in which I craft a premise, which includes a lot of similar elements to what would then become a blurb. So having that kind of boiled down, almost elevator pitch, one small paragraph, this is what the book is about, is an effective tool. And
so for your second novel, Piercing the Veil, that's going to be a Kickstarter pre-sale starting April 9th. It's very soon. Mm-hmm. We'll have a link to that in the show notes for anyone who's interested. So you have that blurb ready to go. You're ready to pull the trigger on that pretty soon then.
Yes, I am crafting the page as we're recording.
Well, that's exciting.
That's great.
So as far as your reach then, you've already published the one book. You must have kind of an idea of what your dedicated following is. Are you collecting emails from people to then send out notifications about the follow-up book? Give me a sense of how, getting that kind of returning reader is working for you.
Well, we'll see if readers return when I put out a second book. um, but as far as engagement, I do have an email list that's available on my Linktree. And I do have people sign up for it either online or when I do events. Lots of people sign up to be kept in the loop. I put out a monthly email where I basically list out, here's any events I'm going to be doing, here's the updates on the Kickstarters and my progress. Sometimes I will tease cover art and character portraits before they go live to everyone else, so there are many perks.
Yeah, that totally worked on me. That was good stuff. Part of and I think I'm showing my age here a little bit, but I remember when I was in school 25 years ago that self-publishing was much, much more difficult than it is now. And I never thought of it as a real possibility. Later, really like 2010, I started looking into it and I decided to do a little bit of self-publishing, but it wasn't for fiction. It was just for like how-to books on flag football because it was a hobby of mine and I enjoyed just sort of putting it out there and, seeing who wanted it. But for fiction, I still have it stuck in my head that really the only option is to go through traditional publishing for me. But there's a lot of gatekeeping there and it seems like you have to have an audience before you can really even approach those publishers. Do you think that's true?
Oh, the author platform. So the way I see traditional publishing is they want proof of concept on your book, which comes in many forms. Can you prove that, people find you interesting? Can you prove that people find your book interesting? I've seen evidence of people who take a TikTok channel and turn it into a novelization. Assistant to the Villain. That was a TikTok personality who wrote her personality into a novel, because her channel was so popular. Anyway, so they want you to prove that you're interesting, that you can captivate people, that you write things that people like, or that you write things like what people already like. Right? We all remember the vampire craze of the 2000s, you got a vampire book, let me read it. So they come in trends. I'm seeing right now the growing trend of Egyptian fiction, things like, in the style of The Mummy 2001, I'm seeing a lot of them cropping up all of a sudden. I think we're going to see that for the next 2-3 years. Fairy fiction in the Romantasy was huge. I read some real stinkers in that one that got published because they were in genre and had the zingy, tropes in them. Publishers really like to publish, something that another publishing house has in their own color. So anyway, that is the reason I don't like publishers.
No, that's fair. Because if you look at it as a commodity, if I know that people like this flavor of bubblegum, then I'll make my own version of that bubblegum in its own flavor, and I'll try to capture market share. And it's antithetical to what I want to do, which is just create art and put it out there in the world. And I guarantee you I will not be commercially successful, and I kind of don't care. Super great. Not a big deal.
And Kalynn, what I've struggled with is I put it into my head very, very early on in my career that I needed that to validate what I was doing. And that's something that I've had to get over, taken years to try and get over, of just being like, why don't you just write for yourself? Or, as I have been doing for the past 20 years, write for my friend Art here. So it's taken time, but I'm getting there.
It's nice to have that person who can read, your drafts when they're like fresh off, my husband does that for me. I call him my alpha reader because he gets everything even before my betas, and has to listen to me talk about my books endlessly. But having that, kind of writing is not a validation heavy sport. Books take forever. I'm currently writing books that aren't going to be published for another 2 years. And I'm not going to hear anything nice about them for a very long time. So having that one person there who can just read it when it's fresh to say, this isn't as bad as you think it is. I mean, it's not great, but it's not that bad. It's really nice.
Yeah. My partner will say, I'll give her like the very first, like, hey, I wrote this. What do you think about this? She'll be like, I love it. And then I'll be like, hey, about 2 weeks later, I'll say, hey, remember that little 400-word piece? I rewrote it. I worked out on it. What do you think? And she'll be like, man, you're thinking too much. This is horrible. So it's good to have somebody that you could talk to about it.
Yes.
It's kind of the institutional excuse of doing this podcast. It was a great way for us to be engaged in the act of writing and almost relearning a lot of the things that we had learned in school and had kind of lost over time. And that's why I've been really enjoying doing the podcast. We try to capture these universal truths, and it's so fun to hear you really echo a lot of the things that other people have come on and said that we've been saying. So it's like, oh my God, there is a way to do it. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great also because I hear a lot of confidence in your voice, and that's really something. That's really nice to hear too. When did you decide to try and open up to a broader audience?
I wrote very recreationally. I did not have a supportive of the arts upbringing. You know, I was very much told, you know, from a young age that writing was a hobby, not a job. Prove them wrong. I make almost no money now. Anyway, so for a long time, I saw it as very recreational. It was actually my husband who really reignited my passion for it. I was actually going for a degree in social work instead, where I could have made no money doing that. What I decided is I had my kids very young, and I decided that I was going to spend my 20s raising my kids, and that when I got to 30, I would start querying publishers. That did not happen. I spent a lot of my 20s raising my kids from babyhood to toddlerhood and just writing whatever I wanted to in my spare time to remain a sane human person. It wasn't until my oldest went to kindergarten that I had a lot more time. And I was like, you know, I'm just going to jump the gun here and dust off this old project and actually put it through to publishing. I took things very, very slowly with my career. I wrote for almost a decade without putting anything out anywhere ever. I think a lot of people, my dad as an example, sees my writing career and thinks to himself, I would like to do that. He begins writing a lot of books and then immediately thinking about promoting them. And I think that is a terrible, horrible, the worst idea ever. I honestly think that you need to have kind of a creative playground, you know, to just play, you know, discover your artistic voice, you know, just do whatever you want, drop projects, pick projects up, figure out how you work best, you know, learn what your voice is, you know, after you've done a few projects, you're going to start seeing common themes, and that's you know, and you can kind of dig that out of there. And don't expect to publish your first book. Awakening Anne was not my first book. Awakening Anne was my, I think, third book that I actually finished. And I think that was back in 2013. And when I wrote it then, it was horrible. The whole series was just one standalone book that contained plot lines from what are now book 1 and 2. And so when I dusted it off, I kind of bisected those and polished the whole thing immensely. And it actually turned into something that I think is authentically me and of much higher quality, much less predictable. Your early work, I think, of anybody is always going to sound like someone else. My first thing that I ever wrote was basically a Pirates of the Caribbean fan fiction. Everybody starts with mimicry, but you're going to start digging yourself out of it, you know, eventually.
With work, right? I mean, really, you're focusing on like just doing the work, do the work, and eventually you're mining for your own voice at that point.
Yeah, I kind of had 3 phases where I had phase 1 where I had infants and wrote when I could, when I wanted to. I wrote what I wanted. I was very lax with everything. Then I moved into phase 2 where I started my daily writing habit, which I honestly think if you are serious about writing, you absolutely must have 1 hour a day, even when you don't feel like it, just sit there. Daily writing habit changed everything for me. The year that I started doing that, I started, I think, 6 new projects. And 2 of those, in addition to Awakening Anne, I am looking to produce right now.
Wow, that's great.
Yes, yes. So anyway, it shows it was just a creative, like it was a renaissance year for me when I started doing that. And it is a practice that I have kept up until this day. I found it's very much like going to the gym. The ability to sit down in a designated place, that's incredibly important, and write at a designated time for at least 1 hour, you know.
Okay. I was with you until you said gym, so.
I'm not a very fit person, but it is you're training yourself. What I found that when I'm in a long, like kind of habit of sitting down and getting to work, I get to work faster than when I'm kind of spotty with it. You know, you're training your brain to shift into that creative space, even when the muse isn't with you, which is great when it happens, but you can't. If you're going to meet professional goals, you can't wait for the muse to show up.
Kalynn, it almost sounds like you're just been sitting with us talking, because these are like the same kind of things that we've been talking about for the past 2 years or 30 years. Yes.
Yeah.
If it's true, it's true.
That's a great ethic. Yeah.
So what is your background as far as your formal training in writing? It sounds like you've been doing the work, you're hustling, you're grinding, you're going to the gym. What was it that kind of set you on that path, and what kind of exposure to formal training did you have, if any?
I don't have any. I have done my 1,000 hours myself. I've learned what works through hard knocks and experience.
That's exceptional. That's outstanding. Because Tim has Tim has a bachelor's in English. I have a bachelor's and an MFA, and it helps, but it's not necessary. If you want to do it and you work hard at it, you'll get better, and you're living proof of that. So good for you.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk about your process. You mentioned earlier that at one point during your renaissance, you had as many as 6 projects that you had kind of kicked off at the same time. When you sit down to write, do you force yourself to work on the most dominant of those, or do you just sort of allow yourself to go to the one that's most interesting on that particular day? Kind of walk us through what you do.
I'm in a real pivot from where I was then. At that point, I didn't have anything in production. So it really was, what am I feeling right now? Very mood. Now I very much am in production. I'm putting out 1 book a year for the White Crow series, and I'm loading up the Ballad of Fate, which is my romantasy series that'll be starting next year. And I'm writing the 2nd book in that this year, because I work ahead quite a bit. So finding the balance now that I'm entering kind of my production phase has been very tricky because I am a workaholic, I've discovered. So I've tended to be like, well, I could do this, and this, and like load up my calendar as much as humanly possible. And then I just, look at that and say, oh my God. So kind of the happy medium I've come to is I'm going to do what I have to do this year in order to keep up with my production schedule. I do 1 year for writing, 1 year for editing, and then it's release year. And so keeping up with that, I call it my carousel because it goes around and around and around.
Nice.
Because, this year I'm writing the 4th White Crow book. I'm editing the 3rd White Crow book, and I'm releasing the 2nd White Crow book. Carousel.
Yes.
Anyway, so I do the carousel, and then any extra time that I just so happen to have is playtime, where I can work on whatever my heart desires, which I think that we all desperately need as creative persons.
So is this 365 days a year, or do you take time off?
So I take my kids' Christmas break, I take off. And yes, it's 365 days a year other than.
Wow. Okay. That's dedication. I like it.
I do take Saturdays off as well.
Well, I rescind everything I just said.
I know, I'm so lazy.
Now, when you're in the process of play, how do you keep track of things? Is there a way that you like, hey, you know what? This small little thing that I wrote on this, random time in a February, that might be evolved into something, down the road. How do you organize your ideas?
So I think that I have tiers. So I have my active projects, which would be my 2 series that are approaching production or in production right now. Then I have the next tier down from that is my side projects. And these are all ideas that are really fresh to me and I really believe in. And I would like to work on and produce in the foreseeable future. And then the tier down from that, I'm not sure what I call it, but these are ideas where like they're a little stale to me. Like I think that they're not completely worthless and maybe I've put some work into them, but I'm definitely not feeling them right now. And then below that, I have my dead drawer, which is my idea graveyard, which I keep around just in case because I sometimes cannibalize this place. And yeah, that's where ideas go to die or be cannibalized.
See, so Tim,
Right.
that means that all of my ideas are in the dead drawer. Now I understand. Now I see.
Hey,
Well,
I've cannibalized whole characters out of that drawer, so
That's
they're never
great.
worthless.
How do you know when an idea goes to that drawer? How, like, is it hard? Is it difficult sometimes? Is it easy? I mean, I'm sure it's everything, but
It's like Tinkerbell. You have to believe in a project, and when you stop believing in a project, you can't work on it anymore.
yeah,
That's when it's dead.
Great. That's great advice. It's just so funny because every single thing I read, I'm like, but no, I believe it could work. I believe it. I do. No, it should go to the dead drawer. That's great. That tiered system is great. I'm probably going to rip that off.
Oh, please.
So let me ask you about your in the weeds process. So you've got an alpha reader, your husband, who's earning his pay every day, I imagine.
Oh, yeah.
But once it's sort of gone through that filter, you've honed the language to the point where you are happy to show it to other people. Do you have a set of beta readers who will read your work for you, or do you solicit through other groups? Is it friends? Like, how are you approaching that part?
I start writing, and I try my absolute best not to edit unless it's structurally important to move forward. So I just go through with the idea. I usually have a pretty detailed outline, like not like every detail of what's going to happen, but I definitely know my important plot points and my ending at this point. So I try and write through as much as possible. My husband's reading almost everything that comes off the presses just to, keep me motivated to keep going. And then I put it in a drawer and don't look at it for almost a year while I work on other stuff. I think that time in the drawer is a irreplaceable resource because it gives you fresh eyes. If I turn around and try and edit it too quickly, I have found myself literally typing the same sentence that I'll say 2 sentences from now because I'm still in the same headspace. I'm still, on the same track, really. So I put it away for a very long time. Then the next year, right, I pick it up and I do what I call the story edit, which I think a lot of people would equate to a development edit, where I go through, I make sure that the plot makes sense. The characters are coming through the way I want. Most everything is the way that I want to say it, but I'm not super picky with grammar at this point. Not super picky, right? I'm not taking it through like editing filters and line editing it yet because the story's still very much in flux and I don't want to do the same work 8 times. So after I've gotten the story to the point where it's like, I've taken this as far as I can take it. This is how I want the story to be. The characters are coming through. The plot makes sense. Then I give it to my betas and I forget about it for many, many more months. And by the time the betas are done with it, I try not to take any, I try to have around 10, and I try not to take any singular criticism too much. I try and look and see where they overlap. If 2 of my betas are agreeing on something, I really need to look at it. And so I make a lot of alterations at that point. And once I've fixed all the betas issues with the draft, I take it into the final edit. And at this point, I'm worried about commas and misspellings and inconsistencies in the actual verbiage. And then it's done.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It actually lines up with what we've done a few episodes on, right, Jim?
Yes, it does. That's great. It's nice to see that. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I did want to ask you about the beta readers where they have overlap. I think that's really clever of you to not take any one person's advice as, elite.
Not too strongly.
Exactly.
Like if someone gives you an advice and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, that's right, I should change that. But if you have, like 1 in 10, like I said, saying something and you're like, oh man, I'm really not seeing that, you discount it.
Even if you may agree with them, I think it's safe for you to not dive in and try to write their book. I mean, people have different preferences.
Speaking about preferences, that's a really interesting note I have from the betas for book 2, Piercing the Veil, which is about to come out. My betas were very split on the ending. And what I noticed when I really took a step back and saw where the party lines were divided, because I had some people saying, oh, we love it, and some people saying, no, this seems too easy. And I found it was a generational split.
Oh.
My older beta readers had one opinion. My younger beta readers had another, and so I went in favor of the opinion that I felt more strongly. And what was my more ideal reader, demographic, so that would be my younger audience and the way I wrote it originally. So, but that was a very interesting one where I had multiple beta readers agreeing that they didn't like the ending, and I chose to stick to my guns. I did, however, make alterations because I realized they weren't seeing the ending the same way I was. And so I made several alterations to make my point less, between the lines and more blatantly overt. And I think that would definitely help soften the issue.
Yeah. I mean, to have that kind of data to make a decision, a good quality decision is invaluable.
I spoke to another author at an event who had experimented with beta readers. And she told me that she used, I think, 3. And I was like, oh, no. And she literally said, well, they didn't agree on anything. I'm like, of course they're not going to. You only got 3 of them.
Right. Yeah.
I think between 8 and 12 is the perfect number. You don't want to be overwhelmed with opinions. But you need to have enough to have a good sample.
So how do you collect the information from the beta readers? Are you asking them to make notes on a manuscript, update a PDF? Do you actually give them a Google form? Like, how do you get the feedback from them?
So my first time around, I actually printed out paper copies. I like to have some sort of personal relationship with my betas because it is a bit of a trust fall for me that I'm giving them works that aren't even close to being published yet. So anyway, so I used to give out papers. Now that I have 2 books that are in betas this year, and one of them is very long, I have switched over to doing Google Drive. I encourage my betas to comment throughout the document. And something I learned after doing it the first time, I include a questionnaire. So good questions to have on there. Are my first few chapters engaging? What genre do you consider this to be? Were you satisfied with the ending? Were you ever confused? Were you ever bored? Those are all questions that are in my questionnaire. And sometimes I will include particular questions at certain points in the draft, like, was this okay? What do you think about this person? That sort of thing.
With the beta readers, how did you come to having that pool? Is it a mixture of friends and family? Is it folks? Did you try and make conscious decisions to have some folks maybe that you met through the networking of being an author? Or how did it come to be?
I actually actively look for unqualified beta readers. And what I mean by that is I'm not looking for people with English degrees or other writers or people who work as editors. I am looking for... You are a reader. You read the kind of books that are similar to my book. What do you think? I found when you give it to editors or you give it to other writers, they tend to try and fix problems instead of flagging problems. And I don't want you to try and fix it. I wrote the book. I'll fix the book. What I want you to do is say, I'm confused. I don't like this. I do like this. This is boring. I want feedback that I can fix, not suggestions on how to fix it, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So as we know that Piercing the Veil is dropping very soon, where can people find more information about you and your work? Where should we point them?
So I have a page on applewhitegames.com. You can also follow me on Instagram or Facebook to stay very up to date or sign up for my email list. I think that following on Instagram or Facebook is how you're going to stay most in the loop with what's going on. I try and keep that very up to date. Obviously, don't miss the Kickstarter pre-sale. That's where I sell signed copies and my hardcover special editions that are only available on Kickstarter or from me in person if you happen to live near Ohio.
Outstanding. Kalynn Applewhite, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great time.